You may believe that going no contact is the thing that finally hurts an avoidant person. You may imagine that disappearing, staying silent, and creating distance will make them suddenly understand what they lost. But there is a deeper reality that is often overlooked. Avoidant people do not necessarily experience absence as immediate emotional pain. In many cases, distance initially gives them something they have been seeking all along: emotional breathing room. What truly challenges their internal system is not simply your absence, but a change they cannot easily predict, control, or explain. When their familiar expectations about the relationship stop working, something different begins to happen. They may start questioning their assumptions about closeness, attachment, connection, and even their own emotional patterns. People with avoidant tendencies generally respond to separation differently from people who have a stronger need for reassurance and immediate emotional connection. When a relationship becomes intense, emotionally demanding, or filled with heightened expectations, an avoidant nervous system can become overloaded. Because of that, separation may initially feel calming rather than devastating. There can be a sense that the emotional pressure has finally been reduced, and that they have regained control over their personal space. This does not automatically mean they never cared, or that the relationship meant nothing. It means their learned method of handling emotional discomfort involves creating distance. For many people with avoidant patterns, stepping away has become an automatic way of restoring emotional balance whenever closeness begins to feel overwhelming. Some avoidant patterns can develop when emotional needs were not consistently welcomed, understood, or responded to earlier in life. A person may gradually learn that relying heavily on others feels risky, uncomfortable, or disappointing. They may therefore become highly self-reliant and learn to keep emotional needs private. Over time, this response can become deeply familiar. When someone they care about pulls away, their mind may not immediately interpret the situation as an emergency. Instead, it may register the new distance as a reduction in emotional stimulation. Their system gets a chance to settle. This is why no contact does not always produce the dramatic reaction people expect. The person may initially feel calmer because the emotional triggers connected to the relationship are no longer active in the same way. This is one of the reasons no contact is frequently misunderstood. People often assume that silence automatically creates emotional pressure, but an avoidant person may already be accustomed to processing emotions privately, postponing difficult feelings, or mentally separating one part of their experience from another. When communication suddenly stops, their first thought may not be that they have lost someone important. It may simply be that things feel quieter now. That calm can easily be mistaken for indifference. Yet calmness does not necessarily tell you how meaningful the relationship was. It only tells you what their nervous system is doing in that particular moment. Emotional processing can happen later, gradually and indirectly, rather than appearing immediately through obvious longing or visible distress. That does not mean avoidant people are unaffected by separation. Their response can simply unfold on a different timeline. When the emotional pressure disappears, their system gets an opportunity to stabilize. At the same time, however, the relationship is no longer receiving the constant emotional stimulation that kept it active in their conscious awareness. Eventually, memories, familiar places, conversations, routines, and unexpected reminders can bring the connection back into focus. The difference is that these moments may arrive after the initial relief has passed. Instead of feeling an immediate emotional storm, they may experience small moments of reflection, curiosity, comparison, or unexpected memories. Their emotional response can come in pieces rather than as one obvious wave of grief. Another important piece is autonomy. Avoidant individuals can be especially sensitive to anything that feels like a threat to their independence. Even when a relationship is healthy, increasing intimacy can sometimes create an internal sense of pressure. The person may not consciously think, "This relationship is taking away my freedom," but their behavior can still communicate discomfort. They may need more space, become quieter, or reduce emotional engagement. This does not automatically mean they dislike the person. Sometimes closeness activates concerns about dependence and vulnerability. When no contact begins, that perceived pressure disappears. The person can breathe again and feel that their emotional environment is once more under their own control. This is why someone can appear surprisingly comfortable after a period of separation. From the outside, it may look like they never cared. Internally, however, they may simply be experiencing the restoration of emotional space. That distinction matters. Relief is not the same thing as resolution. Feeling calmer does not necessarily mean every attachment has disappeared or every emotional question has been answered. It can simply mean that the immediate activation surrounding the relationship has settled. If the connection was deeply meaningful, its significance may still exist underneath that calm. It may take time before the person has enough emotional distance to recognize what the relationship actually meant to them. The deeper fear within avoidant attachment is also often misunderstood. It is not always simply a fear of losing another person. It can involve a much stronger concern about losing control over their own emotional world. They may worry about becoming too dependent, becoming overwhelmed, losing their independence, or being unable to regulate their feelings. Because of this, intimacy can carry a different meaning for them. Closeness may be comforting in one moment and threatening in another. The more emotionally significant someone becomes, the more vulnerable the avoidant person may feel. That vulnerability can create a conflict between wanting connection and wanting to protect personal independence. Their withdrawal is often an attempt to resolve that internal conflict by restoring distance. This is why saying that avoidant people simply fear intimacy does not tell the whole story. They may actually want intimacy, but struggle with what intimacy demands emotionally. Being close to someone means allowing that person to matter. It means accepting emotional influence, vulnerability, responsibility, and uncertainty. For someone who has built their identity around independence, those experiences can feel destabilizing. So when emotional closeness rises beyond what they can comfortably regulate, their instinct may be to regain control. They create space, reduce communication, or become less emotionally expressive. From their perspective, this can feel like emotional self-protection rather than rejection. No contact, therefore, may feel like restoration rather than punishment during the first stage. The emotional expectations become quieter. They no longer have to navigate difficult conversations, reassure another person, explain themselves, or confront emotional demands. Their internal environment becomes easier to manage. But this sense of control should not be confused with emotional resolution. A person can feel regulated while still carrying an attachment. They can function normally while still having unresolved feelings. In fact, one of the complications of avoidant processing is that emotional relief can temporarily create the impression that everything has been solved. If they feel fine, they may assume the relationship is no longer important. Later experiences can challenge that assumption. Avoidant people can also confuse emotional relief with emotional certainty. Once the immediate pressure is gone, they may believe they have made the right decision simply because they feel calmer. But calmness only tells them that their nervous system has settled. It does not necessarily tell them whether the relationship was valuable, whether they missed the person, or whether their withdrawal solved the deeper issue. Those questions can emerge much later. A memory, an empty routine, seeing the other person doing well, or experiencing a new relationship that lacks the same emotional depth can create contrast. That contrast can bring previously suppressed meaning back into awareness. This is where emotional detachment, combined with self-respect, becomes much more significant than simple silence. The goal is not to disappear in order to punish someone or make them suffer. It is to stop participating in a dynamic that requires you to constantly chase, explain, convince, or emotionally overextend yourself. Healthy detachment means your emotional state is no longer controlled by whether the other person moves closer or farther away. You stop trying to force clarity from someone who is unwilling to provide it. You allow their choices to belong to them, while allowing your own choices to protect your emotional well-being. Many avoidant relationship patterns develop around a familiar rhythm. One person moves closer, emotional expectations increase. The avoidant begins feeling pressure, and then they retreat. The other person notices the distance and responds by pursuing, questioning, explaining, or asking for reassurance. The avoidant then experiences even more pressure and withdraws further. Eventually, the intensity settles, and the avoidant returns when the emotional environment feels safer. This pattern can repeat for months or even years. What makes it powerful is not necessarily that either person consciously planned it. The pattern simply becomes familiar. Both people learn what the other usually does, and that predictability keeps the cycle alive. When you stop participating in that pattern, the relationship begins operating differently. You no longer chase every withdrawal. You do not fill every silence with messages. You do not automatically explain yourself whenever they become distant. You remain respectful, but you stop offering unlimited emotional access. This does not mean becoming cruel or intentionally difficult. It means becoming emotionally grounded enough that their behavior no longer dictates your behavior. That difference can be significant because the avoidant person no longer receives the familiar reaction they have come to expect. Instead of distance producing pursuit, distance produces calm boundaries. Instead of silence producing emotional pressure, silence simply remains silence. This kind of neutrality can be more psychologically noticeable than dramatic emotional reactions. Emotional extremes are often easier to understand because they fit familiar categories. Someone is angry, someone is hurt, someone is chasing, someone is demanding reassurance. But calm detachment is harder to categorize. The avoidant cannot easily tell themselves that you are simply upset and will eventually return to the same pattern. They may begin noticing that something about the relationship has changed. They expected one response and received another. They anticipated pursuit and encountered independence. They expected emotional availability to remain constant and discovered that it was no longer automatic. The important thing is that this should never become a strategy for manipulating someone into chasing you. The purpose of emotional detachment is not to create anxiety in another person. It is to restore balance within yourself. If you withdraw while secretly monitoring whether the avoidant reacts, you are still emotionally attached to their behavior. True detachment means you can step back without needing a specific outcome. You are not withholding affection to make a point. You are simply refusing to continue investing in a relationship dynamic that repeatedly leaves you emotionally depleted. That grounded position can create a different relational environment, but more importantly, it protects you regardless of what the other person chooses. Avoidant people are sometimes described as emotionally cold or incapable of attachment, but that description is far too simplistic. Their emotions can be very real, while their expression of those emotions remains highly controlled. They may experience attachment without immediately acting on it. They may care deeply while still needing substantial space. One of the reasons this creates confusion is that their behavior does not always provide an obvious reflection of their internal experience. They may process a meaningful relationship through memories, private thoughts, and quiet comparisons, rather than through open emotional conversations. This means their silence cannot reliably tell you whether they care or do not care. Only their consistent actions and willingness to participate in a healthy relationship can provide meaningful evidence. Another major factor is clarity. People with strong avoidant tendencies may feel more comfortable when they understand where they stand. Emotional ambiguity can be difficult because it creates uncertainty about expectations and responsibility. They may wonder what the other person wants, how much emotional engagement is expected, or what the relationship is becoming. When emotions become intense, but the situation remains unclear, stepping back can feel like the easiest way to regain perspective. Their withdrawal is therefore not always an attempt to escape the person. Sometimes, it is an attempt to escape the confusion surrounding the emotional situation. They may need distance before they can understand what they actually feel. This explains why emotional pressure can be counterproductive. If you demand an immediate answer from someone who is already overwhelmed, the demand itself can become another reason for withdrawal. More intensity does not necessarily produce more clarity. In some cases, it creates more confusion. A calmer environment can allow a person to observe the situation without feeling forced to defend themselves or make an immediate emotional decision. That does not guarantee that they will return or become more emotionally available. It simply creates conditions where reflection becomes more possible. Real emotional understanding cannot be forced through pressure. It has to develop internally. When separation occurs, an avoidant person may therefore begin by analyzing rather than emotionally chasing. They may quietly wonder what changed, whether the distance is temporary, whether the other person is still emotionally available, and whether the relationship has actually ended. These are cognitive questions. They are trying to understand the new structure of the relationship before deciding how they feel about it. This is different from someone who immediately feels overwhelmed by abandonment and seeks reassurance. Avoidant processing can begin with observation and move toward emotion later. That is why their lack of immediate reaction should not automatically be interpreted as proof that they never cared. Clarity can also make emotional safety easier for someone with avoidant tendencies. When expectations are direct, communication is stable, and boundaries are understandable, they may feel less pressure to defend their independence. This can make them more capable of remaining present. However, emotional comfort should not be confused with deep emotional availability. Someone can stay in a relationship because the structure feels manageable, while still avoiding vulnerable conversations. Genuine emotional growth requires more than predictability. It requires the willingness to tolerate vulnerability and take responsibility for how one's behavior affects another person. Stability creates an opportunity for that growth, but it does not automatically produce it. One of the most noticeable changes occurs when you stop being emotionally predictable in the old way. This does not mean becoming inconsistent, playing games, or deliberately confusing someone. It means your emotional behavior is no longer automatically determined by theirs. If they withdraw, you do not immediately chase. If they become silent, you do not rush to fill the silence. If they return, you do not instantly abandon your boundaries. Your behavior becomes consistent with your values, rather than with their emotional movements. That distinction can interrupt a relationship pattern that previously operated almost automatically. The avoidant may begin noticing that the old rules no longer seem to work with you. For a long time, they may have assumed that withdrawal would eventually be followed by pursuit. They may have learned that they could create distance without completely losing emotional access. That expectation can make retreat feel relatively safe. But when the other person becomes emotionally self-contained, the old assumption is challenged. The avoidant has to recognize that their choices actually influence the relationship. Their distance can have consequences, not dramatic consequences, not punishment, but natural consequences. If someone repeatedly withdraws, the other person may eventually stop investing at the same level. That is not a manipulation. It is simply what happens when one-sided emotional effort is no longer sustainable. At first, the avoidant may not understand this change emotionally. They may simply notice that the familiar reaction is missing. Their mind registers the interruption before their heart necessarily interprets its meaning. They may even make small attempts to see whether the old pattern still exists. They might become slightly more available and observe your response, or create a little more distance to see whether you pursue them again. This does not always represent conscious manipulation. Human beings naturally test familiar relational expectations when something suddenly changes. If the old reaction consistently fails to appear, their internal understanding of the relationship has to be updated. That is where emotional independence becomes especially powerful. When you are no longer an extension of someone else's emotional behavior, you create a healthier boundary between your internal world and theirs. Their silence belongs to them, their uncertainty belongs to them, their withdrawal belongs to them. You do not have to absorb it and immediately turn it into action. This does not guarantee that an avoidant person will suddenly become emotionally available, but it does remove one of the strongest reinforcements of the old pattern. They can no longer rely on your emotional reaction to maintain the same push and pull dynamic. The real shift, then, is not about becoming unpredictable for the sake of attracting attention. It is about removing automatic reactions from the relationship. Once automaticity disappears, both people have to make more conscious choices. The avoidant person can no longer assume that distance will always lead to the same outcome. You can no longer assume that their return means everything has changed. Both sides have to evaluate what they actually want and what they are willing to contribute. That is much healthier than trying to control someone's emotional response. A relationship becomes meaningful when both people participate consciously rather than simply repeating a familiar attachment cycle. Real change in avoidant dynamics also does not come from emotional punishment. Trying to make someone jealous, deliberately provoking them, using silence as a weapon, or creating dramatic exits may produce a reaction, but a reaction is not the same as emotional growth. If an avoidant person already associates emotional closeness with instability, dramatic behavior can simply confirm that belief. They may think, consciously or unconsciously, that relationships create too much emotional chaos. Instead of becoming more open, they may retreat further. If the goal is genuine change, the environment needs to become calmer, clearer, and more grounded, rather than more emotionally explosive. Emotional accountability works differently. It means allowing behavior to have natural consequences without turning those consequences into punishment. If someone repeatedly avoids difficult conversations, you do not have to keep chasing them for answers. If they repeatedly withdraw from emotional responsibility, you can step back. If they refuse to participate in mutual communication, you can decide that the relationship no longer meets your needs. You do not have to create a dramatic confrontation to communicate that reality. Your behavior itself becomes the message. You are showing that connection requires participation from both people, and that emotional access cannot remain unlimited when reciprocity is absent. This kind of accountability can eventually help an avoidant person recognize patterns in their own behavior. They may begin seeing that whenever they withdraw, the relationship becomes weaker. When they refuse difficult conversations, emotional closeness decreases. When they avoid responsibility, trust becomes harder to maintain. This recognition may not arrive as immediate regret. It may begin as simple pattern awareness. They connect their behavior with its outcome. That is a much more meaningful form of reflection than simply feeling bad because someone is no longer chasing them. Guilt can create temporary emotion, but awareness has the potential to create lasting behavioral change. The response from the other person matters greatly during this process. If your reaction is chaotic and constantly changing, the avoidant person may focus primarily on managing the emotional turbulence. They may become preoccupied with defending themselves rather than examining their behavior. But when your response is calm and consistent, the message becomes easier to understand. You are not attacking them. You are not trying to control them. You are simply responding to what is actually happening. That creates a cleaner connection between behavior and consequence. Over time, that clarity can make self-reflection easier because there is less emotional noise surrounding the situation. Avoidant individuals can also be sensitive to whether a boundary is genuine or strategic. There is a major difference between stepping back because you need to protect your peace and stepping back because you want to make someone chase you. The first comes from self-respect. The second remains emotionally dependent on their reaction. If they sense that your silence is simply another attempt to control the relationship, the old cycle may continue under a different form. Genuine boundaries feel different because they do not require performance. You do not need to prove that you are unaffected. You simply make decisions that are consistent with your own well-being. This is why emotional neutrality can be so valuable. Neutrality does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop allowing every emotional fluctuation to dictate your actions. You can miss someone without chasing them. You can love someone without accepting unhealthy treatment. You can hope for change without putting your life on hold. You can remain open to a conversation without constantly monitoring whether they will return. That combination of care and boundaries is much healthier than either emotional dependence or deliberate emotional coldness. It allows you to remain connected to your own identity, regardless of what the other person chooses. Eventually, an avoidant person may be confronted with something they cannot easily regulate away: the reality of their own relational patterns. When emotional chaos is removed, they have fewer distractions from the consequences of their choices. They may begin noticing that relationships repeatedly become difficult at the same stage. They may recognize that they withdraw when vulnerability increases. They may see that they feel relief after creating distance, but later experience curiosity or regret. They may start questioning whether independence has become a shield against intimacy. These realizations can be uncomfortable, but discomfort is not necessarily harmful. Sometimes it is the beginning of self-awareness. Still, none of this should be treated as a guaranteed formula for making an avoidant person come back. Every person is different. Some people have enough emotional awareness to examine their patterns and make meaningful changes. Others may continue avoiding vulnerability for years. Some may return because they genuinely want to build something healthier. Others may return because they miss familiarity without being prepared to offer anything different. That distinction is extremely important. The goal should never be to master a psychological trick that forces someone into attachment. The goal should be to create a healthier emotional position for yourself and allow the other person to reveal what they are genuinely capable of giving. In the end, the strongest thing you can do is stop trying to break the avoidant person's defenses and start becoming responsible for your own emotional life. You do not need to punish them with silence. You do not need to prove your worth through disappearance. You do not need to manipulate their fear of losing you. Instead, become steady. Let your boundaries be clear. Let your actions match your words. Stop chasing explanations that are not being offered. Give space when space is needed, but do not abandon your own needs simply to keep someone comfortable. When emotional pressure disappears and self-respect takes its place, the entire dynamic becomes easier to see. The deeper lesson is that people rarely develop emotional maturity because someone successfully hurt them enough. They develop it when they become capable of seeing their own patterns clearly. For an avoidant person, that awareness may require distance, stability, and enough emotional safety to look inward without immediately becoming defensive. When the familiar cycle of pursuit and withdrawal stops feeding itself, they are left with a choice. They can continue avoiding vulnerability, or they can begin examining why closeness feels threatening in the first place. That choice belongs to them. Your responsibility is not to force the answer. Your responsibility is to stop participating in a dynamic that keeps both people trapped. So if you are wondering what truly changes the dynamic with an avoidant person, it is not simply disappearing and hoping they suffer. It is becoming emotionally grounded enough that their distance no longer controls your behavior. It is replacing pursuit with boundaries, chaos with calmness, and emotional dependence with self-respect. That shift may cause the other person to reflect, but even if it does not, you still gain something important: your emotional freedom. And if the avoidant person eventually looks back, what they encounter is no longer the same relationship pattern they left behind. They encounter someone who understands their own worth, recognizes the importance of reciprocity, and no longer needs another person's uncertainty to determine their sense of security. That is where the real transformation begins. Not when an avoidant finally feels pain, not when they suddenly become desperate, and not when they chase you because they are afraid of losing access. The deeper change happens when the relationship stops being controlled by automatic attachment reactions. You stop trying to manage their emotions, and they are left with responsibility for their own. You stop filling every silence, and the silence becomes something they must interpret for themselves. You stop accepting inconsistency as proof of love, and connection becomes something that must be demonstrated through behavior. Whether they grow from that experience is ultimately their choice, but you no longer have to sacrifice your peace waiting for them to make it. When emotional chaos is replaced by calm consequences, something important becomes possible. The relationship can finally be seen for what it actually is, rather than what either person hopes it will become. If there is genuine attachment, meaningful reflection may develop with time. If there is emotional maturity, healthier communication may eventually follow. And if neither exists, you gain the clarity to move forward without continuing the same cycle. Either way, you are no longer trapped in the exhausting pattern of chasing, waiting, interpreting, and reacting. You have stepped outside the loop. That is the real power of emotional detachment. It is not about making an avoidant person afraid of losing you. It is about becoming secure enough within yourself that you no longer need to make anyone afraid in order to feel valued.